Was it this one? I don't remember. So,
yes.
So, Mona, it's just Mona, right?
Sorry?
In terms of how I introduce you, it's just Mona.
Mona.
Mona, okay.
Mona. Eleni.
Eleni, okay. Not Doctor.
Mona Ataya. Mona Ataya.
I'm going to do first name. I don't. Testing, testing, 1, 2, 3. Wonderful, we have audio. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We have a fantastic panel. We have some really exciting conversations we're going to have this morning. We'll jump into introductions. We have Mona and Eleni and Ifeyinwa joining us virtually. So we'll start with just very brief introductions. Perhaps we start off with Ifeyinwa, who's joining us virtually. Just 2 or 3 minutes, just introducing yourself and obviously, you know, how you're going to participate and contribute to this fantastic conversation.
Thank you, Jason. My name is Ifeyinwa Ugochukwu, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of the Tony Elumelu Foundation. We are the largest private sector-led philanthropy that is laser-focused on entrepreneurship empowerment. Over the last 5 to 7 years, we have trained, mentored, and funded over 10,000 young African entrepreneurs with a proprietary online training program that many have likened to a mini MBA. We have mentors scattered across the globe, and we give each of our beneficiaries a $5,000 non-returnable seed capital because we believe that funding and training are 2 sides of the same coin. So I'm not going to get into it now, but we're really passionate about entrepreneurship empowerment and very thrilled to be part of this conversation and want to commend the government of the United Arab Emirates, the organizers of Dubai Expo, the Global Business Forum, for this amazing platform to look at how we can all work together to deepen the ties between UAE and Africa by and through and for entrepreneurs. Thank you.
Fantastic. And actually that leads perfectly into Eleni. You're essentially, you know.
Hi, my name is Eleni Gabre-Madhin, and most of you know me in the private sector, starting with the Ethiopia Commodity Exchange that I founded, and then recently running a private youth business incubator in Ethiopia, Blue Moon. But I've recently started at UNDP Regional Bureau for Africa just a couple of months ago as the Chief Innovation Officer and launching a new, bold, ambitious initiative called Timbuktu, which is an effort to raise and invest $1 billion over 10 years in innovation, startups across the continent, and really also trying to deploy a model that brings together the whole innovation ecosystem. So lots of exciting things ahead, and hope to touch on it as we go. Thank you.
Fantastic, thank you. So building ecosystems and innovations typically is a multi-decade journey. Muna, actually, 10-year-old company. You have a fantastic story, obviously, from here. We'd love to hear, obviously, introduce yourself and share a bit more about that.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ataya. I'm the founder and CEO of Mumsworld. Mumsworld is the largest and pioneer e-commerce vertical in the Arab world for all things mother, baby, and child. We are today the gateway into the household of millions of mother consumers specifically, and we have become the go-to destination for global and regional brands who want to tap into this important consumer. We ship to over 20 countries across the region. We have raised 6 rounds of funding since we started. We're the largest funded women-led business in the MENA region. We recently announced an exit, which makes us the first women-led e-commerce vertical in the Arab world to actually exit. And I'm looking forward to sharing our story with you. Thank you.
Fantastic. So a lot has changed over the last decade, especially in technology and innovation. I would love to get your experience 10 years ago raising capital, having gone through the entire journey to an exit. Just, I guess, give us a bit of experience, your experiences with that.
Sure. So we started Mumsworld in 2011, end of 2011, back when the e-commerce ecosystem was very nascent and very young. So it was valued at the time around $2 billion. Most of it was in electronics and travel. Today we're looking at e-commerce representing about $18 billion in the MENA region. So it's come a long, long way. In the early stages, all of the enablers that make e-commerce successful did not exist, or they were very nascent. Payment gateways, access to talent, access to capital, infrastructure, all of that back in 2011 did not exist. So we needed very early on to develop a business with unit economics that were solid, that were scalable, and eventually would drive us to profitability sooner rather than later. So the seed round was, as we all know, the 3 Fs, the friends, families, and fools. So the seed round came very quickly because people knew who we were. This is my second startup. So that was something that we closed in a few weeks. Then the A round, we tapped into local institutional brick-and-mortar retail money. As a digital e-commerce, we knew that the way we were disrupting was going to take time, so we wanted to tap into brick-and-mortar capital, which is what we did in the A round, and that was also fairly easy. Fast forward a year later, when we wanted to tap into our growth capital. Back in 2013, growth capital in this part of the world was still very young. So tapping into that kind of VC money locally, or even PE money locally, was very, very tough. It took us 2 years to do that. But once we secured that B round, and the business continued its hyper-growth, raising the next round and the one after, and then ultimately exit became much, much easier. And for us, really, the fundamental learning is that if you're able to build a business that has true unit economics that are scalable and profitable, and you are solving important unmet consumer needs, then raising capital is something that you can do relatively easier than building a business of smoke and mirror.
Fantastic. As many people may know, Africa is seeing a number of exits in north of $200 million over the last few years. I think the ambition, definitely which Eleni is promoting, is to how do you now take that from 2 or 3 to 1,000 plus. So I would love to hear some of the initiatives that you're essentially trying to capture, encourage, and grow over the next sort of decade to make this a commonplace thing.
Thank you, Jason. I think that there's so much opportunity and so many good things happening on the continent. And I think COVID, if anything, has actually highlighted the vibrancy and the entrepreneurial spirit with young people in Africa. And I mean, you know, when we look at the last few years with the doubling and even tripling year on year of venture capital coming into the continent, that's really encouraging. Of course, I think the last day and a half have been talking about this youth bulge. And I think one thing we should bear in mind, and I believe Fred really put it correctly, is that, you know, the digital opportunity is the one that we're facing. And that we have, because of, you know, 2 decades of social sector spending on health and education, we have an increasingly healthy, educated talent pool that is tech savvy, again, because of the mobile revolution. And we've talked all about mobile money, etc., really happening on the continent. So my interest, or our interest, is to see how to leverage the good news, how to scale it up. If you look at the funding coming into Africa from VC, it's largely foreign driven, but not only that, it's mostly going to, I believe, 80% goes to 3 jurisdictions, Nigeria, or let's say Lagos, Cape Town, and Nairobi, and to some extent Cairo and Accra. So how do we spread this across the continent, and how do we also leverage something else that's been happening over the last year, which we've also spent some time talking about in this conference, which is the AFCFTA. How do you, from the get-go, encourage and enhance the ability to create a Pan-African and beyond facing startup? So this is the other angle that we're looking at, is how to basically think about putting together the innovation ecosystem, much in the way that Israel has intentionally done, starting some 20 years ago, building a domestic venture capital industry, building and incentivizing angel investors on the ground, local capital, tapping into all of those pools. Of course, some jurisdictions, and I know we had this discussion earlier, are doing it much better than others. So how do we learn from Lagos? How do we learn from, to some extent, Nairobi? And how do we really also bring in the other pieces of the ecosystem, knowledge, the universities, R&D, the corporates. So what we see now is a little bit of a disconnect, I would say, between what's happening at the very early stage, and I believe Ife from the Tony Elumelu Foundation, spoke to this sort of this pre-seed $5,000, and I see a lot of donors putting up pitch competitions and hackathons and challenge programs and awarding $5,000, $10,000 grants, and then startups sort of chasing those pitch competitions and not really building businesses at that very early stage, and kind of getting stuck at that stage. And so that's one of the issues that we have to resolve. And then the same thing with the hubs, accelerators, incubators. As I mentioned, I actually ran and still have the top incubator in Ethiopia. And we're all on the same sort of rat race, chasing those donor grants, because the business model of the ecosystem builders is also really flawed, I think. It's not aligned to the outcomes of the businesses that they are supporting. And so how to change that and really create an ecosystem that is integrative, or let's say integrated across these pieces of the ecosystem, and how to incentivize domestic local venture capital is, I think, the issue on the table, and I think the opportunity is just really great. And what we're trying to do, and maybe if I may take another minute to just explain, what we're trying to do is sort of say, listen, there are places on the continent where things are actually starting to line up. Governments have recognized this opportunity. Startup Acts, Dakar or Senegal has a in 2019 passed the Startup Act. Kenya is currently working on that. Rwanda, Ethiopia, and several other places where some things are starting to change in terms of creating a sandbox for innovative startups, regulatory sort of exclusions, and sort of an incubation approach to the regulating of innovation itself. But I think there's still some further work to do in terms of bringing in the corporate linkages, bringing in universities, and something that I think we'll be able to mobilize and do over the next few years.
Fantastic, thank you. So Ifeyinwa has done a fantastic job, definitely across Africa, in empowering entrepreneurship, and sometimes that initial push to become an entrepreneur is as important as what happens many times after. So if you don't start that journey, then you will never continue that journey. So I think it'd be great to hear, Ifeyinwa, what your experiences has been, essentially encouraging that first step of entrepreneurship, giving people the belief that they can be entrepreneurs.
Thank you, Jason. And I couldn't have put it better. The bottom of the pyramid is where majority of the MSMEs in Africa lie. Mona had said that, that first seed capital is, you go to friends, family, or fools. Unfortunately, in Africa, 90% of the young population do not have friends or families that they can go to for that $5,000 they need to prove their concept, to start their entrepreneurial journey. And so at the Tony Elumelu Foundation, we've decided to be a fool for Africa. And we know the impact we've seen with the 10,000 plus that we have empowered in this way. It is so critical to pay attention and to provide this very, very critical funding at that stage when they're not, they're a startup, they have no assets, they have no collateral. Most of the traditional institutions are not interested. So what we do at the Tony Elumelu Foundation is that we de-risk them, we start them on their entrepreneurial journey. And what we've done is that it's not goodbye once we've trained them and given them their seed capital. We have a very robust alumni community, and we believe in taking them from startup to IPO. And so many of our entrepreneurs have gone on to raise additional capital by way of debt or equity from VCs and traditional financial institutions. So what we are doing is such an important part of the spectrum. Otherwise, what we'll find is that the VCs and the PEs are recycling the same entrepreneurs who are looking at $10 million and above. We all know about the missing middle. We all know that those entrepreneurs who are looking for $500,000 and under are highly underserved. We have to also give credence to the ecosystem. Governments, private sector, development finance institutions have realized and identified the power of entrepreneurship to catalyze economic growth and ensure poverty alleviation, which is what will solve 95% of Africa's problems. And we've made great progress. Since 2015, the PE investment in Africa has tripled. Nigeria, for instance, it was the mere $400 million in 2015 compared to $2 billion in 2019. And even with the COVID pandemic, we find that the ecosystem is slowly stabilizing, because by the end of H1 2021, PE investments has already reached $1.3 billion. So what we're saying is, how can we ensure that the micro and small medium enterprises, who make up 80% of entrepreneurs in Africa and who provide over 70% of the jobs, how can we ensure that they're not left behind? How can we make sure that they get access to the much needed capital, the much needed stimulus to survive the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic? Because sadly, Africa is the epicenter of the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, with decimated industries like tourism and hospitality and devaluing currencies. So there's never been a better time than now to collaborate, to come together, all the stakeholders, governments, DFIs, private sector, and have, what I like to call a whole of society approach. So let's take these entrepreneurs from startup, engaging with them through organizations like ours who do grants, because there's nothing else you can really do at that stage. And once we've de-risked them and they're now ready to move up the pyramid, then they will become attractive to the DFIs, to the financial institutions and the PEs and the VCs. And then we can really see growth. We can really see cataclysmic impact of the work that we're all doing. So we are actually putting together a multi-donor trust fund that will have a blended finance model comprising grants, debt, and equity with multiple stakeholders and multiple donors, so that once you finish with the grant stage, the same entrepreneur, you've tracked their progress, you've watched their growth, you have access to their data, access to their business performance, and so they're already known, they've been de-risked, and the same fund can then ensure that they get the equity or debt they need for growth. Once we can have this collaborative whole of society approach, I think we'll begin to see massive impact in this space, because a lot of work is already being done. Let's come together now and accelerate that work.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Ifeyinwa. So there is a poll, bridging African Emirati entrepreneurs. What are the top underlying ingredients for the success as Dubai as a trading hub? So, I think in 15, 20 minutes or so we'll have the actual results, but please, obviously try and participate and contribute there. So actually, let's try and bring it back to where we are today. I think what's happened over the last 18 months with COVID-19, with economy shutting down, as we were debating in the back quite spiritedly, Dubai has made itself a fantastically attractive place for tech entrepreneurs, for people of talent to essentially come and set up business here. I myself, 8 months ago, incorporated a company. I've been traveling to Dubai as a tourist destination for the longest time. I incorporated a company. I got my Emirates ID literally 8 months ago. Now I'm here like every 4 to 6 weeks. It's not just me. There are many other entrepreneurs who are seeing not just a tourist destination, but a natural sort of connectivity, transport, and trading hub and cultural hub, more between UAE and GCC and obviously Africa. So I think forums like this definitely promote that. I think definitely more should be done to encourage entrepreneurs to at least see UAE as a perfect partner. And obviously go into Muna's experiences over the last sort of 10 years. Raising capital 10 years ago was very difficult. Raising capital now is I would hope much more easier because of the billion-dollar exits. You've obviously exited as well. Hopefully you're circulating your experiences back to the new generation. But I would love to sort of talk in terms of the legal stability, some of the initiatives that the UAE obviously have offered you to expand your business to 20 different countries over the last few years.
Thank you. So I'm going to actually start with the capital because this is a topic that we're talking about as a first point of call. You can't start or build a business without access to capital. If you look at the statistics in the UAE, in 2020 alone, there were 129 deals in the UAE, just over $570 million. Over 57% of the capital deployed in MENA is coming to the UAE. So that's the reality. So we are actually better positioned in the UAE to attract capital. And there are many reasons for that. There are a lot of fundamentals in the UAE that have been built over the last decade that have created for an ecosystem that not only encourages entrepreneurship but supports entrepreneurship. One of them, and I would say probably the most important, is the DNA of top-down. So the DNA of the government. We're living here in the UAE in an ecosystem that encourages disruptive innovation. It's speaking the narrative from the top down. We're living it, we're breathing it, we're seeing the revolution of the UAE and Dubai specifically over the last decade. And as entrepreneurs, this is contagious and you kind of ride that bandwagon. So that's the first thing. And also part of that DNA is how supportive is the government to failure? Because keep in mind that most businesses that start up, most SMEs actually fail. They fail more times than they succeed. So how are the bankruptcy laws, for example? How accommodating are you to failure? Do you help organizations pick up and start again? So that's the first thing. The second thing for us is, UAE has relatively a very sophisticated hub of import and export. We have seamless connectivity across borders. So we were able to tap into a fairly sophisticated infrastructure for logistics, 3PL, e-commerce logistics from very early days. The third is access to talent. Now, obviously, in a disruptive framework, you want to tap into talent locally and you want to import talent from outside. So the first question is, are we upskilling the talent? So UAE was very progressive really from a decade ago in upskilling talent, recognizing that the skills of yesterday are no longer the skills of today. So how do you upskill talents? What are the enablers and the ecosystems that upskill talent? And then separately, how do you attract talent? Now, UAE, we know, has been ranked among the most attractive places to live and work multiple times. So for us, when we're on the phone with top talent from anywhere in the world and we say you're coming to the UAE, that's something that's in our favor. Now UAE has taken it one step further with the 5-year visas, with the 10-year visas. So additional enablers from a very progressive government that is further attracting talent to come here and feeling that this is an area of progression, production and where they can build wealth. The other one is legal infrastructure. This is really, really important. Legal frameworks that are clear, that are transparent, are absolutely fundamental for startups. You know, knowing what to do, how to do it, when to do it. Again, the UAE has had fairly transparent legal infrastructure. IP is another one. You know, when you have IP laws that are grounded and are transparent, this actually encourages innovation. Entrepreneurs who are not protected by IP regulation and IP laws will not be disruptive. They will not be courageous enough to take that leap of faith of innovation. Another one is, again, ecosystem enablers, so free zones. You look at the UAE, there are 20 free zones in the UAE. This is fairly progressive. When we set up Mumsworld, we were able to set up and incorporate in a free zone within weeks. We were able to set up bank accounts fairly cost-effectively and fairly seamlessly. Again, enablers in terms of tapping into ecosystem success metrics was something that we were able to do even 10 years ago, and certainly in the last 10 years it's come a long, long way. So capital, very important, but for capital to come into a region, you need an ecosystem framework that allows it and makes it attractive. And last but certainly not least, obviously, you need you need stability. Political stability, you need lack of corruption, you need an ecosystem that is transparent and a framework that allows you to kind of ride that wave. And last but not least, I will say success breeds success. We have been very, very blessed and fortunate that we have seen a lot of exits recently. I know that when Mumsworld announced its exit just recently, you know, we and two other players in the region that were homegrown, just like us, were also announcing exits. And again, that success drives confidence, drives positive sentiment, and means that the government is even more entrenched in driving change. And the final thing I will say is we are here in a region that is unique in that this is one of the rare places where you actually see the government putting their money where their mouth is. This is government is actually partnering with the private sector and also investing in businesses, funding businesses and supporting businesses. And that is, again, that comes back to what I said in the very beginning. It comes from the top down, and when the top is saying, we are driving you, we're supporting you, we're putting money where you are, and we're listening to your challenges, we're listening to your frustrations, and we are enabling them, that is an ecosystem that's going to thrive, that's an ecosystem that will continue to grow, I think we are only at the tip of the iceberg, and lots of positive things will come out of this region, I believe, fundamentally in the next decade.
Fantastic. You know, I think what's really interesting about the acquisition, you know, of Mumsworld is the fact that it was a regional company. So Tema Group, they obviously have seen the digital change. They want to participate in that digital change, and they've essentially, you know, aligned your strategy with theirs. So you're essentially building the future for them.
So I want to just comment on that because this is actually very important. I remember 10 years ago when we first started Mumsworld, I actually, you know, we sat in a round table and we said that the region is going to start consolidating. You're going to have your disruptive digital players who have a certain DNA of speed, of agility, of flexibility, of really reinventing everything we have grown to know is truth. So when you talk about gold standards, the reality is gold standards are no longer there. They are obsolete. We are now in a disruptive, fast-changing world where digital players like us are reinventing the way things are done. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, you have super successful, deep-pocketed, large conglomerates who have been doing things the same way for many, many decades and have been successful at doing it. Now, the progressive ones recognize that, hey, guess what? We can no longer do what we have been doing for the past 2, 3, 4 decades. And unless we digitize, and unless we become agile and flexible, and we think differently, we're not going to be around in the next decade. So you're going to see a consolidation, and it's happening, and it happened with us, where you have digital pure plays like us with very established, very smart, progressive, brick and mortar DNAs coming together in a symbiotic relationship. We have access to deep resources, which we need for hypergrowth, and they have access to digitized DNA, digitized resources and enablers for them to now very, very quickly digitize and not go down the path of becoming obsolete. And this kind of merger, this kind of consolidation is rampant. You know, we are there, and we're going to see, we believe, a lot more of these happening in the region.
And I just to sort of add to that, and fantastic as well, I think, again, in the last 12 months, the largest acquisition of a technology company in Africa was by Network International, which is a Dubai-based fintech. So it's not just tourism. There's huge amounts of trade. And obviously when Network International were looking for growth, they realized that Africa is the most obvious place for them to find that. And they spent $290 million to buy into that story. So if it's good enough for Network International, I think it's good enough for a lot of people here. You know, to add to that, I think it's really important that, you know, this is a multi-decade journey. You know, one of the big challenges we've had definitely in West Africa is the vast majority of the money is not coming from HNIs within the ecosystem. So again, Eleni, if you can just sort of share some of your kind of concrete next 10-year plans in terms of how do you really want to, you know, build the ecosystem, encourage innovation, and have more of the capital coming locally. And obviously, our ambition is that, you know, banks will be buying fintechs and various other things.
Yes, I think it's really important, and picking up on what Mona was saying about the role of government. I think this intentionality of the public sector to really mobilize and catalyze the innovation ecosystem is critical. And I think that that's kind of really where we're trying to play, is in bringing, as you described it, the sort of the magic marriage or the symbiotic relationship between corporate and you know, and innovative tech sort of entrepreneurs coming together. And a lot of that has to do with also creating this, you know, the platform itself, IP regimes, data protection, open borders. I think that, you know, we cannot build Pan-African startups without the ability for entrepreneurs to move around, to have license to operate. And then the other thing, and I know, Jason, you mentioned this, is the fact that Dubai has increasingly become a place to incorporate. You know, I was just in Rwanda last week, and I could see and heard the vision that Rwanda has to be a jurisdiction where you know, incorporation will be facilitated, and governance and all of those things are being put into play. So I think we're going to see a lot more intentionality by governments, and that's what we're looking to enhance and leverage with this UNDP-led initiative called Timbuktu that I referred to earlier. So very specifically, our ambition is to, over a 10-year period, to mobilize and invest $1 billion with the objective of achieving 1,000 startups that scale and a 10x value creation in terms of value to, you know, economic value creation of 10 billion. With the idea really of having significant impact. And I think there's a lot of work that's gone into thinking about impact and how to best measure it, how to track it, and you know, sort of the whole SDG focus and so on. So although I don't want to go so far as to say this is an impact fund, it is not, but it will be very much oriented to having that kind of impact. Now, coming to the how, because everything is obviously in the details, what we're looking at is sort of, you know, thinking about how to create sort of ecosystem hubs that will bring together the ecosystem to bear on a vertical. So if it's fintech, health tech, edutech, agri-tech, you know, clean tech, energy, creatives, tourism tech, to sort of identify one location that would be a Pan-African hub for that particular vertical, and to have in that location a dual sort of strategy of having a venture builder, which is working with the local ecosystem, as well as the regional and even global partners. And then on the other side, a hub venture fund. And so what we're looking to is to raise I don't want to call it a fund of funds, but a parent fund that will establish, at the moment we're looking at 8 places where we would have these 8 venture funds. And each of those venture funds would be a blended finance model, and putting in a minority share, 35 to 40% from the parent fund, that's largely a catalytic fund, and then having co-investors coming in, with all the appropriate incentives and so on. So when we get into the nitty-gritty of all this, if we're trying to launch or turn existing startups into Pan-African and global companies out of this sort of, out of these bases that we're creating, then one of the questions is jurisdiction, or let's say domicile. Where do we domicile the funds, and where do we domicile the companies? And so that's when looking at Dubai, looking at Mauritius, looking at Casablanca, and of course beyond to other jurisdictions will be very critical. Still very much an early stage, so I don't want to over specify. But the point is, if you're a Cameroonian health tech startup and you're working on, I don't know, digitizing patient data, etc., and you're plugged into the Cape Town health tech hub, then you basically access global capital, domestic capital, but you also basically work on a plan to operate, across 5 years, over 5 to 10 countries, sort of in a very aggressive way that you maybe would not be doing if you were thinking local, based local, and really didn't have that kind of a network to plug into. So that's what we're trying to do, is trying to ease access to knowledge, access to capital, and access to markets for the startups on the continent that maybe don't have an Ivy League pedigree, or went through Y Combinator, or have access to, or speak the same language, or look the same as, where we're currently getting capital from. So these are some of the gaps that we need to redress, building on what we've already been doing. And I think, it's going to be sort of a co-creation. It's very much a private sector driven initiative. This is not business as usual for the UN, as you can imagine. And so we are going to be really reaching out to a lot of partners and engaging in a very private sector-driven way. None of these hubs will look or feel like anything governmental or donor-driven, but absolutely privately managed. If you look, and we have been very closely engaging with the Israeli ecosystem, Singapore, which has sort of leveraged and taken some of that Israel model, but then had a different spin. It's always about how governments can catalyze, but really leave it up to the organic growth and transformation that will come from private sector driving it. So
thank you very much, Eleni. And also, the speakers are here afterwards, so if anyone wants to have specific conversations, there's all this afternoon to engage. I think what I'm surprised about is that Dubai has done a fantastic job of establishing top of mind in tourism. Fantastic job of establishing top of mind when it comes to property. So at least upper middle class, wealthy Nigerians, wealthy Africans, they own property here. I think what I haven't seen is a really big push, definitely within Africa, in terms of like, here is a place to do business. Here's the kind of businesses that we can see. So I would love to see like a Dubai style, let's make it as big as possible splash over the next couple of years to really encourage business to be done here, because it almost feels like it's an open secret. So I know things are happening, everyone here has seen things happening, but it's almost like there's no stories. And even when the Network International deal was done, it wasn't really widely reported. It wasn't like you spend $290 million buying an African company, there should be more media around that. So I know in the Gulf it was big news, but in Africa it wasn't at all. So I think there is so much more to share. There's so much more stories to share. I was here 2 years ago. I hope next year will be bigger. I know, obviously, again, UAE likes to do things bigger and bigger and bigger, so I hope in 10 years it's like 10,000 people. It's like a rock concert out here type of thing. So that will be my ambition, because I definitely feel that there is a natural connectivity, there's a natural business, there is a natural cultural affinity between the two regions. We're almost out of time, so let's have 1 minute just closing thoughts. Please, if you can keep it to 1 minute, because I would love to have the results of our poll come up as well. So Ifeyinwa, if you're still with us, it will be good to hear sort of like your closing thoughts in terms of what your ambitions are for the next 10 years for UAE and Africa trade.
Jason, I'm going to take 2 minutes. And that's because of a very popular saying that goes, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I think that there is immense opportunity for UAE and Africa to do so much together. And now is the time. What Dubai has done in the last 20 years, and we were all going to Dubai in the 90s when it was half desert and half construction site. And look at it today. And for us in Africa, this is aspirational. This is what we want to achieve on our continent. With the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we know that it's brought together 55 countries, 1.2 billion people, and a combined GDP of $3.4 trillion. And this could triple or quadruple if development that was seen in UAE comes to Africa. And there's no better time for the United Arab Emirates to increase its push as an investor on the continent. Right now, UAE is number 4. They're behind China, Europe, and the United States. But infrastructure development is our biggest need. When we talk about creating an enabling environment for entrepreneurs, we need bridges, we need roads. I mean, Nigeria alone, Lagos alone has a 17 million housing need. So there is so much opportunity, and I think now is the time to really begin to think about how we can deepen those trade ties with UAE and how we can deepen the symbiotic business relationship, which would create prosperity for both regions.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Eleni?
Well, I think your T-shirt says it all. Africa, your time is now. I think we're all here because of that, and what's really exciting is to engage with the UAE in this evolving story of the new Africa, and so excited to sort of be part of that.
Fantastic.
So the pace of disruption globally is at a rate that we've never seen before. We are on an exponential vertical rise and change. And in order to ride that wave, because of the digital enablers, you need to put fundamentals in place. We've seen in the UAE that UAE set the path and the strategy to ride that wave. We've seen the tremendous success that UAE has paved. We're sitting now in a region, we talked about gold standard. UAE really has represented what it takes to ride the wave of disruption, to lead the way of disruption, and we are incredibly optimistic. We think that this is just the beginning. The fundamentals are set, and now it's about building businesses from this very large, important region and putting it on the map for innovation, for disruption, and for changing the next decade.
Fantastic. So I was at a dinner yesterday, and there's a saying, apparently, that I heard for the first time. What's good for business is good for Dubai. And I think that, for me, captures everything that I've learned to love about, being in Dubai, the energy, the excitement. It's open, it's transparent. People want to do deals, and there's definitely let's make it as big as possible. I think that kind of feeds into, I guess, the ambition that we have for the next decade or so. We have the poll up, so if you can help put up the poll from, bridging African Emirati entrepreneurs. Transport and logistics infrastructure. Okay, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
That makes sense. I'm an Arsenal supporter, so I'm always carrying around the Fly Emirates logo, so it definitely makes sense. And also, obviously, traveling throughout Africa sometimes can be a struggle, but definitely, from Dubai into Africa is actually it is the most easiest way to travel throughout Africa, surprisingly enough. So I just wanted to thank everybody, obviously thank the economists, thank those who are responsible for putting on the forum and GBF, and I think our ambition is that we will keep on building and you guys keep on supporting us, and thank you guys so much. And can I also get a round of applause for my esteemed colleagues here, so thank you so much.